It was a cold evening in a small town where the lights of a little restaurant glowed warmly against the dark street. Inside, the smell of fresh soup and baked bread filled the air. The sound of clinking dishes and soft talk created a calm rhythm that made the place feel safe. Behind the counter worked a young woman who moved quickly but quietly, her eyes always focused on her work. She wore a simple apron, her hair tied back neatly. Her life was full of long days, but she never complained. She needed this job, and she was grateful for it. She lived in a small rented room with her sick mother and younger brother. Every morning she woke before sunrise to prepare breakfast for them, then walked to the restaurant before the city became busy. She worked 6 days a week, always polite to customers, always patient even when they were rude. Some of them never even looked at her face when they ordered, but she didn't mind. She had learned that people carried their own troubles. The other waiters liked her because she never argued and always helped when someone needed it. The manager often said she was one of the most reliable workers he had ever hired. Yet no one really knew much about her. She didn't talk much about her past. She preferred silence, as if words could break the fragile wall she had built around her heart. In the corner of the restaurant stood a beautiful piano, covered in dust. It had been there for years, a decoration more than an instrument. Sometimes little children would touch its keys, making sharp sounds before their parents stopped them. But no one ever played it. Still, every time she passed it, her eyes softened. She would glance at it for a second, almost like greeting an old friend she no longer dared to speak to. There was a time when that piano, or one like it, was her whole world. When she was a little girl, her father used to play for her every evening after dinner. He taught her how to read music, how to feel the rhythm in her heart, how to close her eyes and let her fingers tell stories without words. The house they lived in was small, but when music filled it, it felt like a palace. Then one winter everything changed. Her father fell sick, and within a few months he was gone. The piano became silent. Every time she tried to play, tears filled her eyes and she would stop. Her mother sold the piano later when they needed money. From that day she promised herself she would never touch one again. The pain was too deep. But even after years passed, she still heard the sound of her father's songs in her mind when the night was quiet. Life had become a routine. She would wake up early, rush to work, take orders, clean tables, smile at strangers, and return home tired but calm. The only thing she wanted was to keep her family safe and have enough money for her mother's medicine and her brother's school fees. Music was something she had buried deep in her heart, too far to reach. But life has strange ways of waking up what we try to forget. One Friday night, the restaurant was busier than usual. A group of wealthy men came in. They wore expensive suits and talked loudly, laughing and calling the waiters again and again. Their voices filled the room, drowning out the soft music playing from the speakers. They ordered the most expensive dishes and wine, acting as if they owned the place. Everyone knew they were business people from the city, rich and proud. The young waitress served them quietly, keeping her eyes low. She could tell one of them was the leader of the group. He had sharp eyes, a confident smile, and spoke as if every word he said was important. As they ate, his attention moved around the room, looking for something to talk about. His eyes landed on the piano in the corner. "That thing still works?" he asked, pointing at it and laughing. The manager smiled awkwardly and said it hadn't been played in years. "Then why keep it here?" the man said loudly. "It's just collecting dust." One of the waiters laughed nervously and said, "Actually, one of our waitresses knows how to play." The man raised his eyebrows. "Really? Which one?" The waiter pointed toward her. She froze when she heard her name. The group turned to look at her. She smiled politely, trying to hide her discomfort. "You can play, huh?" the man said teasingly. She shook her head quickly. "Not really, sir. It's been a long time." But he wasn't satisfied. "Come on, don't be shy. Play something for us. I'll give you a good tip if it's worth hearing." His tone was half joking but full of pride. She tried to refuse again, saying she hadn't played in years. But he leaned back and smirked. "Don't tell me you're afraid. How hard can it be? Just a few notes. Show us what you've got." The room had gone quiet. Other customers stopped eating, watching to see what would happen. The other waiters looked at her with pity. She wanted to disappear. Her heart beat fast and her hands felt cold. She didn't want to be humiliated, but she couldn't say no to a paying customer, especially one like him. Her manager gave her a small nod, silently asking her to go along with it. So she slowly walked toward the piano, feeling as if everyone's eyes were burning into her back. When she sat down, her fingers trembled slightly. The piano looked older than she expected. She touched the keys gently and a faint sound came out. Dust floated in the air, glowing in the yellow light. The man and his friends waited, half amused, expecting to laugh at her attempt. She stared at the keys for a long moment, remembering how her father used to tell her that the first note was always the hardest. Her breath was shaky, but something deep inside her whispered that it was time. She closed her eyes and pressed the first key. The sound that came out was weak at first, then another, then another. The melody began slowly, uncertain like a bird testing its wings after years in a cage. But then something changed. Her fingers started to move with rhythm and memory as if they had never forgotten. The notes joined together into a gentle tune that filled the restaurant with warmth. The laughter stopped. The voices faded. Even the sound of dishes and cutlery disappeared. Everyone just listened. The man who had mocked her leaned forward slightly, his smile fading. The music grew deeper, filled with sadness and hope. Each note carried a piece of her life. Her father's love, her mother's pain, her long silent years, and the strength she never knew she still had. The melody rose and fell like waves, gentle yet powerful. People began to close their eyes, feeling emotions they couldn't explain. The kitchen staff peeked out from behind the door. Even the manager stood still, his hands frozen mid-air. She didn't notice any of them. In that moment, she was not in the restaurant anymore. She was back in her old house, sitting beside her father, his smile bright as he clapped along. She played not for money, not for the rich man, not even for the applause, and she played to remember, to feel alive again. Her fingers moved faster now, the song turning into something strong and full of life. It was as if all the pain she had carried for years was pouring out through the piano, washing away the dust that had covered her heart. When the final note came, it hung in the air like a soft whisper before fading into silence. No one moved. For a few seconds, the room was completely still. Then the silence broke. Not with laughter, but with applause. A wave of clapping filled the room, echoing off the walls. Some people even stood up. Tears shone in her eyes as she slowly looked around. She hadn't expected this. She had been ready for embarrassment, not admiration. Her hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear and from relief. The man who had forced her to play stood up. For once, he had nothing clever to say. He simply looked at her and said quietly, "That was incredible." His voice no longer carried arrogance. There was respect in it. She gave a small nod and smiled faintly before returning to her work, though her heart was still racing. The rest of the night passed in a blur. People kept talking about her performance, asking her questions, praising her. The man left a large tip on the table before leaving, but she barely noticed. Her mind was far away, still lost in the echo of the music. When the restaurant closed and everyone went home, she sat at one of the tables, looking at the piano. It seemed different now, alive again. She touched its surface softly and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the streets were empty. She walked home under the quiet stars, feeling lighter than she had in years. For the first time in a long while, she smiled for no reason. The music she thought she had lost was still inside her. It had just been waiting for the right moment to return. That night, as she tucked her mother into bed and listened to her brother's soft breathing, she looked out the window at the moon and made a silent promise to herself. She would play again, not for others, not for fame, but for the little girl she used to be, the one who dreamed, who believed, who felt alive when her fingers touched the keys. Life had reminded her that even in the hardest times, beauty can return when you least expect it. The next morning, the world looked a little brighter, and so did she. It was early morning, and the first light of the sun came through the window of the small room where she lived. The air smelled of fresh bread from a nearby shop, and the street outside was slowly waking up. She got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her mother and brother who were still sleeping. Her mother's weak breathing reminded her why she worked so hard. She boiled some water, made tea, and left a small plate of food for them before putting on her worn-out shoes and stepping outside into the cool air. Her mind was still full of what had happened the night before. Every step she took to the restaurant felt lighter than usual. She couldn't stop replaying the sound of the piano in her head, the way it had felt under her fingers, the way the room had gone silent, the look on people's faces when she finished. She hadn't meant to move anyone. She had only done what she had been forced to do, but somehow something inside her had changed. The pain she had buried for so long had turned into something else, something warm. When she entered the restaurant, it was still quiet. The smell of cleaning soap and coffee filled the air. The manager was standing near the counter, going through papers. He looked up when she came in and smiled slightly. "You made the restaurant famous last night," he said softly. She laughed nervously and shook her head. "I didn't do anything." But he said, "You did. People can't stop talking about you. They say they've never heard music like that before." She didn't know how to answer. She just smiled and went to the back to start her work. By the time the restaurant opened, a few regular customers had already arrived. Some of them greeted her more kindly than usual. A few even asked, "Will you play again today?" She blushed and shook her head, pretending to be too busy to answer. The piano sat in the corner, shining now because someone had cleaned the dust off it. Every time she passed it, she felt something stir inside. It wasn't fear anymore. It was curiosity, a quiet call she couldn't ignore. Around noon, the same wealthy man who had compelled her to play the night before came in again. He was alone this time, dressed neatly but without the loud confidence he had before. The moment she saw him, her heart jumped. She didn't know whether to be angry or nervous. She went to his table, ready to take his order. He looked at her and gave a small, almost shy smile. "I wanted to say sorry for last night," he said. "I didn't mean to make fun of you. I was being stupid." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded politely. He continued, "But what you did, it was beautiful. I've never heard something like that in my life." She thanked him quietly, but part of her didn't know if she should believe his words. People said nice things all the time, but they didn't always mean them. Still, there was something in his tone that sounded honest. He ordered a coffee and sat quietly watching the piano. "Do you play anywhere else?" he asked after a moment. She shook her head. "I stopped years ago." He looked surprised. "That's a shame," he said. "You have something rare. You should never hide that." When he left, he told her he might come again to hear her play. She didn't answer, but his words stayed with her the whole day. That night, when the restaurant was empty, she sat at the piano again. Her hands hesitated over the keys, unsure whether to begin, but then she pressed one softly. The sound was lonely but clear. She played slowly, quietly, only for herself this time. The notes filled the empty room like a whisper in the dark. She didn't notice that the manager was standing near the door, listening silently. When she finished, he said gently, "You should keep doing that. It suits you." The next few days passed quickly. People kept coming, asking about the girl who played the piano. Some customers even recorded short clips when she agreed to play for a few minutes. She never played long pieces, just small tunes that made her feel at peace. She didn't understand why people seemed so moved, but their faces reminded her that music had power, not just to entertain but to heal. One evening, when the restaurant was closing, the wealthy man came again. This time, he didn't sit at a table. He waited near the door until she finished cleaning. When she noticed him, he said, "I didn't come to eat tonight. I came to ask you something." She stopped and looked at him carefully. "Would you be willing to play at one of my company events next week?" he asked. She froze. "An event?" He nodded. "It's a gathering of business partners. There will be music, dinner, everything. You'd be perfect." Her first instinct was to say no. The idea of playing in front of so many people made her heart race. "I'm not a performer," she said softly. "I work here. I can't do that." But he didn't push. He only said, "Think about it. You don't have to decide now, but I believe you belong on a stage, not behind a counter." His words lingered even after he left. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She remembered the first time her father had taken her to a music hall when she was little. The lights, the piano, the people clapping. It had felt like magic. She had dreamed of being there one day, but dreams didn't feed hungry families or buy medicine. Now suddenly that dream was calling again, and she didn't know whether to run toward it or away from it. The next day she told her mother about the offer. Her mother smiled weakly and said, "Maybe it's time you let the world hear you again." Her brother was excited and said, "You have to do it. You're amazing." Their belief gave her courage. She decided to say yes. When she told the man, he looked genuinely happy. "You won't regret it," he said. "We'll arrange everything. You just need to play the way you did that night." The following week felt like a blur. The restaurant staff teased her in a friendly way, saying she was becoming a celebrity. She laughed with them, but deep inside she was nervous. She practiced every night after closing, sometimes staying until midnight. Her fingers grew sore, but her heart grew stronger. Every time she played, she could almost hear her father's voice whispering, "That's it, keep going." The music started flowing more naturally, no longer held back by fear. When the day of the event arrived, she wore a simple but elegant dress that the man's assistant had given her. It was the first time in years she had dressed up for anything. The event was held in a big hall with shining lights and people in expensive clothes. She felt small among them, but the man greeted her kindly and told her everything would be fine. "Just close your eyes and play," he said. "Let them feel what you feel." When she walked onto the stage, her hands were shaking again, just like that night in the restaurant. But when she saw the piano, everything else faded away. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The room grew quiet. The sound of the piano filled every corner of the hall. It was soft at first, then strong, full of emotion and color. People stopped talking, their eyes fixed on her. The music told stories of struggle, loss, love, and hope. It reached people's hearts in ways words never could. By the time she played the final note, the silence was deep. Then came the applause, louder and longer than she had ever imagined. Some people even stood up. She looked around, her eyes shining with tears. The man was clapping with everyone else, his face filled with pride. After the performance, many guests came to speak with her. Some praised her, others asked where she had studied. She answered politely, though she was still in disbelief. A few people even gave her their cards, saying they could help her get more opportunities. It was overwhelming, but deep inside, she felt a new spark of hope. Later that night, when she finally returned home, her mother was waiting awake. She told her everything, from the applause to the people who wanted to help her. Her mother smiled, her eyes full of tears. "Your father would have been so proud," she said softly. She sat beside her mother, holding her hand. "I just wanted to play one song," she whispered. "But maybe this is just the beginning." Before sleeping, she looked at her hands and thought about how much they had been through, carrying trays, cleaning tables, working endlessly, and now finally, they were creating something beautiful again. The world had seen her not as a waitress, but as an artist, and for the first time in years, she felt that her life might be changing. As she drifted off to sleep, she didn't dream of tiredness or worry. She dreamed of light, music, and her father's smile standing in the crowd clapping for her. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for sure: she would never stop playing again. The morning after the event felt like a dream. The sunlight that came through the window seemed warmer and the air felt lighter. She woke up slowly, her mind replaying the sound of applause that had filled the hall the night before. For a moment she stayed in bed, not wanting the feeling to end. Her mother was already awake, sitting near the window with a cup of tea. When she looked up and smiled, her eyes were full of pride. "You did something special," she said softly. Her brother came running in, holding an old phone in his hand. "Look," he said excitedly. "Your video is all over the internet." She took the phone, surprised to see a video from the event already shared on social media. Someone had recorded her performance, and now thousands of people were watching it. The comments were full of kind words. People called her the waitress with the heart of music, and the girl who made the hall cry. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the messages. It was unreal. For years she had lived quietly, unnoticed by the world, and now strangers were writing about her talent. She didn't know whether to feel happy or afraid. At work that day, everything felt different. The restaurant that used to be quiet and unnoticed was now full of new faces. Some came just to eat, but many came to see her. They whispered when she passed by, smiled at her, and a few even asked for photos. The manager seemed both proud and nervous. He knew this attention was good for business, but he also didn't want to lose her to something bigger. She tried to stay humble, doing her job as usual, but deep inside she could feel that life was no longer the same. Later that afternoon, the wealthy man who had invited her to the event came in again. He was smiling when he saw her. "You're becoming famous," he said playfully. She laughed nervously and said, "I didn't plan for any of this." He nodded. "I know, but sometimes life gives us what we don't plan for." He sat down and ordered coffee. After a moment he said, "You have a gift, and people can see that. I know a friend who works in the music industry. He saw your video and wants to meet you." She froze. "Meet me? For what?" "To talk about possibilities," he replied. Maybe something more than just playing in restaurants and small halls. The thought made her nervous. "I don't think I'm ready for that," she said softly. "I'm not trained like other musicians." He smiled kindly. "You don't need to be like anyone else. What you have can't be taught. Just meet him." No promises, no pressure. She agreed to think about it. That night when she went home, her mother encouraged her to go. "You never know where this could lead," her mother said gently. "Your father always said music has its own way of finding the right path." Her brother jumped in excitedly, saying, "You should do it, you're already famous." She laughed at his excitement, but her heart was full of questions. Could she really do it? What if she failed? What if this was just a passing moment? Still, deep inside, she felt that something important was waiting for her. 2 days later, she met the man's friend at a quiet cafe. He was a calm, middle-aged man with kind eyes. He told her he had worked with musicians and composers for many years. "I watched your video," he said. "You don't just play. You feel the music. That's rare." He asked about her background, and she told him about her father, about how she had stopped playing after he passed away, and how she had only touched the piano again recently. The man listened carefully, then said, "You have something honest in your playing. I can help you record something if you want. We can keep it simple, just a few pieces. If it goes well, people will notice even more." She hesitated, but finally agreed. He gave her the address of a small studio and told her to come the next weekend. When the day came, she was so nervous she almost didn't go. Her hands felt cold and her heart beat fast as she walked through the studio door. The smell of wood and the quiet hum of instruments filled the space. She had never seen a professional recording place before. Everything felt serious and new. The man greeted her warmly and introduced her to a sound engineer. "Don't worry," he said. "Just play what feels right." She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and started to play. The first few notes were soft, then stronger. The melody she chose was one she used to play for her father. The sound filled the room with warmth and sadness. The engineer looked amazed. When she finished, there was silence. The man smiled and said, "That was perfect." They recorded 3 pieces that day, each one filled with emotion. When it was done, she felt both tired and alive. Over the next few weeks, things began to change faster than she expected. The recordings were shared online, and people loved them. She started receiving messages from musicians, small venues, and even local TV stations wanting to feature her story. The restaurant became even busier. Some customers came from other cities just to see her play in person. Her co-workers teased her, saying she was becoming too popular for them, but they were proud. Even the manager treated her with more respect now. The wealthy man kept visiting from time to time, but now his attitude had softened completely. He no longer spoke with pride or sarcasm. He seemed genuinely happy for her. One evening, as the restaurant was closing, he said quietly, "I know I started all this in a bad way. I forced you to play that first night, but now I see that maybe it was meant to happen. I'm sorry for how I treated you then." She smiled softly and said, "Maybe if you hadn't done that, I would still be afraid to play." They both laughed, and for the first time it felt like they understood each other. As weeks turned into months, her life began to shift. She was still working at the restaurant because she needed the money, but her schedule was different now. Sometimes she was invited to small events, charity dinners, and local festivals to perform. Each time she stepped on stage, she still felt nervous, but she also felt something powerful, a quiet strength that came from her music and her story. People often came up to her afterward to say that her music reminded them of hope, of lost dreams, of memories they had buried. Those words meant more to her than applause. One evening, she received a letter in the mail. It was from a local arts foundation offering her a scholarship to study piano professionally. Her hands shook as she read it aloud to her mother and brother. "They want to give me lessons," she said in disbelief. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Your father always wanted you to learn more," she whispered. "Now you can." Her brother hugged her tightly, jumping up and down in excitement. It was the first time she truly believed that her dream could become a real future. The next few months were full of hard work. Balancing her job, her mother's care, and her lessons wasn't easy. Sometimes she came home late and fell asleep still wearing her apron. But she didn't complain. Every note she played, every class she attended, every new piece she learned felt like a step forward. Her teacher was patient and kind, always reminding her that talent wasn't about speed or perfection, but about honesty. "You already have the heart," her teacher said once. "The rest will come naturally." The more she learned, the more confident she became. She started composing small melodies of her own, soft, emotional tunes inspired by her memories. One day, during a small performance at a community center, she played one of her original pieces. The audience listened quietly, and when she finished, they applauded warmly. A few people cried. It was in that moment she realized something important. Music wasn't just about being perfect, it was about connecting with people. Even though her days were long and tiring, she often found herself smiling without reason. She felt proud that she had come this far. Sometimes she would sit alone at night, thinking about her father, imagining him sitting beside her, nodding approvingly. The old pain in her heart had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It had become something beautiful, something that gave her strength instead of sorrow. One night, after finishing her last shift, she walked past the piano in the restaurant. The lights were off, and the air was still. She sat down quietly and played a soft tune. Her fingers moved easily now, full of confidence. She didn't notice that the wealthy man was standing near the door, watching silently. When she finished, he said softly, "You've come a long way." She looked up and smiled. "I'm still learning," she replied. He nodded. "That's what makes you special." She didn't know where her journey would lead next, but she knew one thing clearly. She was no longer the girl who hid from her dreams. She was someone who had found her voice again through the piano, someone who turned pain into music and fear into strength. The applause, the attention, the fame, they were nice, but what truly mattered was that she had rediscovered herself. When she left the restaurant that night, the streets were quiet. The moon was bright above her and the air carried the faint sound of laughter from far away. She walked home slowly, her heart calm and full. She knew there would be challenges ahead. Life was never easy. But for the first time, she didn't feel afraid of what was coming. She had faced her past and turned it into something beautiful. And that, she thought with a quiet smile, was more than she had ever hoped for. The young waitress sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands trembling slightly above the keys. The restaurant was silent, and even the usual clinking of dishes and quiet chatter had stopped. All eyes were on her. For a moment she thought about standing up and walking away, pretending the whole thing never happened. But something deep inside her stopped her. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was pain, or maybe it was the quiet voice of her father that still lived in her heart, whispering that she could do this. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Her heart pounded so loudly that she could hear it echo in her ears. She touched the piano gently, as if afraid it would break. The keys were cool under her fingers, and the familiar feeling brought a rush of memories. She remembered sitting beside her father as a little girl, watching him play soft melodies that filled their small home with peace. He used to smile at her and say that music could speak when words could not. Now, after so many years, she was about to test those words again. The first note came out soft and uncertain, almost like a whisper. It was shaky, but it echoed beautifully in the quiet room. She pressed another, and the sound began to flow like water. Her fingers moved slowly at first, but the melody began to take shape, and the fear that had frozen her heart started to melt away. The rich man who had asked her to play leaned back in his chair, his smirk slowly fading. His friends, who had been ready to laugh, sat straight and watched with quiet surprise. The waitress didn't look at anyone. Her eyes stayed closed as she played, her body swaying gently with each note. Soon the music filled every corner of the restaurant. It was not perfect, but it was full of life. Each note carried a story, a piece of her heart that had been hidden for too long. It spoke of the night she spent worrying about her mother, the morning she walked to work before sunrise, the time she smiled through pain. It was all there in her music, the struggle, the loss, the strength. People who had come just to eat their dinner forgot their food. The cooks peeked from the kitchen door and the servers stopped moving. Even the air felt still, as if afraid to interrupt. The melody changed, becoming deeper and stronger. Her fingers moved faster now, with confidence and grace. Her body relaxed as the music carried her away. She didn't think anymore, she just felt. The piano became her voice, her way of saying everything she had kept inside for years. Some people in the restaurant had tears in their eyes. They could feel something they couldn't explain, something real. The man who had forced her to play looked at her differently now. There was no sign of mockery on his face. Instead, there was something like shame. He had thought it would be funny to watch a nervous waitress make a fool of herself, but now he couldn't look away. He saw someone who wasn't just a server. She was an artist. She was someone who had faced pain and still found beauty in it. His friends sat quietly, all of them unsure what to say or do. The song kept rising, the notes growing stronger. It was like a storm building in her soul, ready to burst. Her fingers flew across the piano with energy that no one expected from someone so small and humble. The sound grew powerful, filling the entire restaurant. People began to hold their breath as if afraid that even a sigh might break the magic. The melody reached its highest point, and for a few seconds it felt as though time had stopped. Then slowly she brought it down again. The storm softened into calm waves, then into a quiet stream. The notes faded one by one until there was only silence. She didn't move for a moment. Her hands rested on the keys, her head bowed slightly. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. It was the kind of silence that comes after something sacred, something that touched everyone's heart. And then it happened. A single person began to clap. Then another and another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted into applause. People stood up cheering and clapping loudly. Some had tears in their eyes, others just smiled, amazed by what they had witnessed. The waitress slowly lifted her head, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She looked around, unsure how to react. She had never imagined that people would react like this. She had only wanted to survive the moment, to avoid humiliation. But instead, she had reminded everyone what real beauty felt like. The rich man stood up too. He didn't clap at first. He just looked at her with an expression that mixed guilt and admiration. When she finally met his gaze, he nodded slowly and started clapping as well. His friends followed, though their faces were red with embarrassment. The waitress stood up from the piano and gave a small, uncertain smile. Her hands were still shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the rush of emotion she could barely contain. The restaurant manager walked over to her, his voice trembling with excitement. He told her it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard in that place. He said she had brought the room to life. A woman sitting near the front told her she used to play piano when she was young, but she had never heard anyone play with such heart. Someone else said they had filmed it and wanted to post it online. The waitress was stunned. She didn't know what to say. She just smiled shyly and thanked them, still overwhelmed. The man who had compelled her to play finally stepped closer. He spoke softly, no longer loud or arrogant. He told her that he was sorry for forcing her. He admitted that he thought it would be funny to see her fail, but instead he had been taught a lesson. He said her music reminded him of something he had lost, the joy of feeling something real. The waitress listened quietly. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply said it was fine. But inside she felt something shift. For the first time in years, she wasn't just a tired worker serving others. She had found a piece of herself again. After the performance, people came to her table to talk, to thank her, to ask if she had ever studied music. She told them that her father had taught her when she was little, but after he passed away, she had to stop. She never had time for lessons again. People were surprised that someone could play so beautifully without professional training. She told them it was the only way she could talk to her father now, through music. Her voice trembled as she said it, and a few people wiped their eyes quietly. When the crowd finally settled, she went to the back room to take a breath. Her hands still tingled from playing. She sat on a small stool and stared at them, wondering if this was real. It felt like a dream. The restaurant, the applause, the faces, everything seemed far away. She had no idea that this one night would change her life forever. Outside, people were still talking about her performance. Some were showing the video to others, amazed by what they had just witnessed. The rich man stayed for a while longer, sitting quietly. He didn't order more food. He just sat there deep in thought. When he finally got up to leave, he walked past her and said softly, "Thank you. I'll never forget tonight." She nodded, unsure what else to say. That night, when her shift ended, she walked home under the streetlights, her mind full of noise and silence all at once. She remembered every sound of the piano, every face that had looked at her. She thought about her father again, about how proud he would have been if he had seen her play. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but they were not from sadness. They were from something else, and something like peace. When she reached home, her mother was waiting for her. She asked why she was late, and the young woman told her everything. Her mother listened with wide eyes and then hugged her tightly. She said, "I told you your gift would never leave you." They sat together in the small room, holding hands, both smiling quietly. For the first time in years, hope filled their little home. That night before she went to bed, she opened her old music notebook that she had hidden for years. It was filled with her father's handwriting and some unfinished notes. She traced her fingers over the faded ink and whispered, "I played again." She promised herself she would never stop this time. What she didn't know yet was that the video someone recorded would soon spread online. People around the world would hear her story and her music. But for now, all she knew was that something inside her had come alive again. She closed her eyes and smiled, knowing that this night, the night she had been forced to play, had become the night she found herself again. The next morning started like any other, but something in the air felt different. The young waitress woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing on the small table beside her bed. At first, she thought it was just an alarm or a message from work, but when she picked it up, she froze. Her phone screen was filled with notifications, hundreds of them. People she didn't know were tagging her, messaging her, and commenting on a video. Her hands trembled as she clicked on one of the links. It was a video of her playing the piano from the night before. The title read, "Waitress forced to play piano stuns everyone." It had already been viewed thousands of times, and the number kept rising every few seconds. She watched herself on the screen, her eyes closed, her fingers moving across the keys. The sound of the piano filled her small room just as it had filled the restaurant. It felt strange watching herself from another person's point of view. The comments under the video made her heart race. People were writing things like, "This moved me to tears. Such raw emotion. She deserves a stage, not a restaurant." Others were asking who she was and where she worked. Some even said they wanted to hear her play again. She didn't know what to think. Part of her felt proud, but another part was scared. She wasn't used to attention. She had spent most of her life trying not to be noticed, blending into the background, doing her job quietly. Now, all of a sudden, strangers were talking about her everywhere. Her mother, who had been making tea in the kitchen, came to see what was happening. When she saw the video, tears filled her eyes. She hugged her daughter and whispered, "You see, the world finally heard you." When she reached the restaurant later that day, the place looked different too. The manager rushed over the moment she walked in, smiling wide. He told her that people had been calling since morning, asking about the girl who played the piano. Reporters wanted interviews. Customers were coming just to see her. The piano, which had sat silent for years, now seemed like the heart of the place. Some customers clapped when she entered, and others smiled warmly. It felt strange, almost unreal. She went about her work quietly, trying to stay calm, but everyone kept talking about the performance. Her coworkers teased her playfully, saying they always knew she had something special. The rich man who had made her play the night before came in again that afternoon. When she saw him, she froze for a second. She didn't know what to expect. But this time, he didn't come with loud friends or a mocking smile. He came alone, wearing a thoughtful look. He waited until she was free, then approached her table. He told her he had seen the video too and that he had spent the whole night thinking about what happened. He admitted he felt ashamed for the way he had treated her. He said he realized that sometimes people judge others without knowing their story, and he had done just that. He apologized sincerely and said her music had touched something in him that he thought was long gone. The waitress listened quietly. She could see he meant every word. She nodded and said softly that she had forgiven him. There was no anger left in her, only peace. Before he left, he handed her a card. He told her that he knew someone in the music world, a friend who worked with young talent. He said if she ever wanted to share her music with more people, she could call that number. She didn't know what to say. She took the card with shaky hands and thanked him. After he left, she stood behind the counter for a long time, staring at it. The thought of performing again scared her, but at the same time it made her heart race with excitement. That evening, after her shift, she sat by the piano again. The restaurant was almost empty, and the lights were soft and warm. She played a gentle tune, something new that had come to her mind during the day. It was softer, hopeful, filled with quiet joy. A few customers stayed behind just to listen. One of them recorded her again. She didn't even notice. She was lost in the sound, in the feeling of finally being free. In the next few days, the video kept spreading. It was shared by musicians, bloggers, and even a few small TV channels. People started recognizing her on the street. Strangers smiled at her and said, "You're the piano girl, aren't you?" She would blush and nod. It felt strange but beautiful too. Her life, which had always been so small and predictable, was suddenly full of color. A week later, she received a call from a woman who said she was a music producer. The woman had seen the video and wanted to meet her. She said her company organized local music events and was looking for someone new to perform at a charity concert. The young waitress hesitated. She wasn't sure she was ready, but her mother encouraged her, telling her that maybe it was time to follow the dream she had buried for so long. After thinking about it for a night, she agreed. When the day of the concert came, she was nervous. The event was being held at a small but elegant hall. She wore a simple dress her mother had helped her choose. Her heart raced as she looked around. The stage was big, the lights were bright, and the audience looked serious. She felt small again, like the girl who used to watch her father play from the corner of their living room. But when she sat at the piano, she closed her eyes and remembered what her father used to say. That music isn't about perfection, it's about feeling. She took a deep breath and began to play. This time, the melody was different from the one in the restaurant. It was lighter, more hopeful. It spoke of second chances, of finding light after darkness. Her hands moved with calm grace, and every note carried warmth. The audience listened quietly, some smiling, others moved by the emotion in her music. When she finished, the same thing happened as before. Silence followed by thunderous applause. Among the audience, she spotted the same man who had once compelled her to play in the restaurant. He stood in the back, clapping harder than anyone else. After the concert, he came to see her again. He told her that he had arranged sponsorship for her next few performances. He said he wanted to help her share her music because it had reminded him of something true, that no amount of money could buy the feeling she gave people with her music. She was touched by his words. She realized that even those who once hurt you could change if they saw the truth. After that, her life began to shift little by little. She still worked at the restaurant for a while, but she also started performing at small events. People invited her to play at weddings, community gatherings, and charity nights. Every time she played, the crowd listened with the same silence she had once feared. She played not to prove herself anymore, but to share her heart. Her mother's health also began to improve, and their home felt lighter, filled with laughter again. One evening, she received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a letter from a music school in the city. They had seen her video and wanted to offer her a scholarship to study piano professionally. She couldn't believe it. Her hands shook as she read the letter over and over. It felt like everything she had ever dreamed of was finally within reach. She cried that night, holding the letter close to her chest, whispering a thank you to her father, who she believed had been guiding her all along. The next day, she went to the restaurant to share the news. Her coworkers clapped and hugged her. Even the manager had tears in his eyes. He told her that she had inspired everyone there to believe in their dreams again. The piano in the corner, which had once been nothing but decoration, had become a symbol of courage and hope. Before leaving that night, she played one last song for everyone. It was a gentle tune that spoke of goodbyes and new beginnings. People gathered around quietly, knowing this would be her final performance there. When she finished, the room was silent again, just like the first night she played. Then came the applause, warm, heartfelt, and full of love. As she walked home under the soft evening sky, she thought about everything that had happened, how a simple, painful moment of being forced to play had led her to rediscover herself. She smiled as she remembered the looks on people's faces when they heard her music. She realized that sometimes life pushes us in ways we don't understand, but even those moments can lead us to something beautiful. She looked up at the stars and whispered softly, "I did it." And somewhere deep inside she felt like her father was listening. Her story, which began in fear and humiliation, had turned into something powerful. A reminder that even the quietest hearts can create the loudest echoes when they find their voice again. The morning of her first day at the music school felt like the start of a new life. The young woman stood outside the large building, her hands holding a small bag with notebooks and pencils. She stared up at the tall glass doors, still unable to believe she was really there. For so many years she had only dreamed of a place like this. Now it was real. Her heart beat fast, a mix of excitement and fear running through her veins. She took a deep breath and walked in. The hall smelled faintly of old wood and polished floors. Students were walking around, laughing and talking, carrying their instruments. Some had violins, others guitars, and some just carried sheet music under their arms. Everyone looked confident, focused, like they belonged there. For a moment she felt small again, the same way she had felt when she first touched the piano at the restaurant. But then she reminded herself of everything she had gone through to reach this point. The long days of work, the nights of practice, the tears, and the courage it took to play again. She told herself that she deserved to be here. Her teacher, an older woman with kind eyes, greeted her warmly and asked her to sit at the piano for an introduction. The room was large, filled with the faint hum of music from other classes. She sat down slowly, her fingers brushing the keys. The teacher asked her to play something that showed who she was. For a moment she froze, not sure what to choose. Then she began to play the same melody she had played that first night at the restaurant, the one that had changed everything. The music flowed through the room like a quiet story. When she finished, the teacher just smiled and said softly, "That came from the heart." Never lose that. Those words stayed with her. She knew she still had a lot to learn, technique, timing, the language of notes. But she also knew she had something that couldn't be taught. Feeling. Weeks passed, and she settled into her new life. Her days were full of lessons and practice, but she didn't mind the long hours. Every day felt like a gift. She made friends who admired her story and encouraged her to keep pushing forward. Some of them had been studying music since childhood, but they respected her for the way she played, with honesty and soul. In the evenings, she still worked part-time at a small cafe nearby, playing soft piano tunes for the customers. People often stopped to listen, and some recognized her from the viral video that had once made her famous. One evening after her shift, she was surprised to see a familiar face walk in, the rich man who had once compelled her to play in the restaurant. He looked different now, calmer and humbler. He greeted her politely and said he had come to hear her play again. She smiled and said she would be happy to. When she finished her last song, he came up to her and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter. It said he wanted to sponsor a charity concert in her name, to raise money for children who wanted to learn music but couldn't afford it. Tears filled her eyes as she read the letter. She never thought that someone who had once humiliated her would one day help her bring music to others. She thanked him sincerely. He said quietly, "You changed me that night. I saw something in you that I'll never forget." She nodded, understanding that life had a way of turning pain into something beautiful if you let it. Months went by, and her name started appearing in local newspapers and online articles. People called her the girl with the piano heart. She was invited to play at more events, small halls, schools, and community centers. She never said no, because every stage felt like a chance to reach someone who might need hope. Her performances weren't about fame, they were about connection. Whenever she played, she imagined her father sitting in the front row, smiling the way he used to when she was little. Her mother's health improved steadily, and she often came to watch her daughter perform. The first time she saw her play at a real concert hall, she cried through the entire performance. Afterward, she hugged her daughter tightly and said, "Your father would be so proud. You brought light back into this family." Those words meant more than any applause or award. One night, after a concert, she was approached by a man who introduced himself as a director for a major music foundation. He told her he had seen her story online and wanted to help her record her first album. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. He explained that the album would feature her original pieces inspired by her life. The thought of it made her nervous but excited. She agreed, feeling that it was time to share her music with the world in a bigger way. The recording process was long and emotional. Each track she played told a part of her journey, the struggles, the loneliness, the courage, and the moments of peace. The studio team was amazed at how easily she could make people feel something just through her playing. When the album was finally released, it received beautiful reviews. People said it was full of heart, that it reminded them of the simple beauty of life. Some even wrote letters saying her music had helped them through hard times. As the years went on, she continued to perform around the country. Each place she went, people wanted to hear the story of the waitress who was once forced to play the piano. It became a story of hope and resilience that inspired many. She never forgot where she came from, and she never acted like she was better than anyone. Even when she played in grand halls, she still treated everyone with the same kindness she had shown as a waitress. One afternoon, she returned to the old restaurant where it had all started. The piano was still there, though it looked a little worn from age. The manager recognized her immediately and smiled with pride. He said the restaurant still got visitors who asked about her. She walked up to the piano and ran her fingers gently across the keys. Then, without saying a word, she sat down and began to play. The melody that filled the room was soft and nostalgic. It carried memories of the night her life changed, the applause, the tears, and the people who had believed in her. The staff gathered quietly to listen. Even some customers paused to take in the moment. When she finished, the manager clapped softly and said, "You'll always have a place here." She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her heart. Later that night, she walked to the small park nearby where her father used to take her when she was little. She sat on a bench looking up at the stars. In her hand, she held a small locket with a picture of him inside. She whispered softly, "I kept my promise. I played again." The wind brushed gently against her face and she closed her eyes, feeling peaceful. Time passed and she continued to touch lives through her music. She opened a small music school one day, the same kind she had once dreamed of attending. The school welcomed children from every background, especially those who couldn't afford lessons. She taught them not just notes and rhythms, but the heart behind the music. She told them that playing the piano wasn't about fame or perfection, but about feeling. She would often say, "If you can make one person feel something real, that's enough." The charity concert sponsored by the man who had once mocked her became an annual event. He attended every year, always sitting in the same seat, watching proudly. Their story became an example of how compassion and understanding could grow even from the most unexpected places. Years later, when she was invited to perform at a grand international music festival, she felt the same nervous excitement she had felt that first night at the restaurant. She stood on the stage, looking at the thousands of people waiting to hear her. Before playing, she told the audience a short story about how a single moment can change a life, how being forced to play one song had opened every door for her. She said she learned that sometimes life doesn't give you a choice, but it gives you a chance. The audience was silent as she began to play. The melody was soft and emotional, rising and falling like a heartbeat. It carried all the memories she had lived, her struggles, her dreams, and her gratitude. When the final note faded, the entire hall stood up, applauding loudly. She smiled through tears, bowing deeply, feeling her father's spirit with her once again. That night, as she walked off the stage, she realized something important. Her story was never just about a girl who could play the piano. It was about courage, forgiveness, and finding beauty in unexpected places. It was about how even the smallest act, like being told to play, could turn into something powerful when faced with heart and honesty. Her life had changed completely, but she never forgot the simple truth that started it all. Music is not just sound. It's emotion. It's a way of telling the world who you are without saying a word. And for her, it was a way of remembering that no matter how hard life becomes, the melody always finds a way to return. When she returned home that night, she sat by her window, listening to the quiet city below. She placed her hands on the piano and played one last song, a gentle tune for herself, for her father, for everyone who had believed in her. The sound drifted softly through the night air, full of warmth and peace. It was the sound of a dream that had finally come true.